Tonight, if it helps, you can let your shoulders drop. You can unclench your jaw. You can let your hands rest wherever they have chosen to rest. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to be useful for the next hour. You only need to listen as far as sleep will allow. This is a story from old Japan. A quiet story. A slow story. About a man named Akinosuke and a dream that felt more real than waking. If your eyes grow heavy, that is allowed. If your mind wanders, that is allowed. If you miss a passage and return later, the story will not be angry. It will continue without you. It always does. Let the room be dim. Let the night be long. And let us begin beneath a tree. Chapter 1. The Village and the Cedar. Long ago, in a green fold of the province of Yamato, there lived a man called Akinosuke. He was not famous. He was not a warrior with a shining name. He did not own more land than he could walk in an afternoon. He was simply a man who liked long days, cool shade, and the company of friends who did not talk too loudly. His village was small enough that everyone knew the sound of everyone else's sandals. Rice fields held the light in the evenings like shallow mirrors. Smoke rose from cooking fires in thin, patient threads. Dogs slept in the middle of paths and trusted the world to go around them. Near the village stood a great cedar tree. Older than the houses. Older than the stone markers by the road. Older, people said, than the oldest grandmother's oldest story. Its trunk was wide enough that 3 people, holding hands, could not quite close the circle. Its bark was furrowed like a map of rivers no one had named. Its roots held the earth the way a hand holds a sleeping bird. Firm and gentle and sure. In spring, new green gathered at the tips of its branches like a soft decision. In summer, the light came down through those branches in quiet coins of gold. In autumn, the wind moved through it like a long, low instrument. In winter, snow gathered in its elbows and stayed there, thoughtful, as if the tree were allowed to rest too. Children dared each other to touch the deepest root hollow. Old men sat with their backs against the trunk and pretended they were only resting their eyes. Birds treated the upper limbs like a city with good laws. On warm days, Akinosuke and his friends would walk to that tree. They would take the long way if the day was kind. They would pass the fields, the little shrine with its frayed rope, the ditch where frogs spoke all through the wet months. Then they would arrive, and the cedar would receive them without ceremony. They would sit beneath it. They would pour a little wine into small cups. They would speak of ordinary things. The weather. The harvest. A neighbor's dog that had learned to open a gate. The price of salt. The way clouds looked like distant mountains, then like boats, then like nothing at all. One friend would always complain gently about his knees. Another would always claim he could predict rain by the smell of the river. Akinosuke would listen more than he spoke, which made people trust him with small truths. And sometimes, they would say nothing. They would listen to insects sowing the afternoon shut with sound. They would watch a single leaf turn slowly as if deciding whether to fall. They would feel sweat cool at the back of the neck. That, too, was friendship. The kind that does not need entertainment. The kind that can share shade and call it enough. Chapter 2. The afternoon that wanted to become a nap. One afternoon, soft with heat and slow with cicadas, Akinosuke felt a heaviness behind his eyes. Not sadness. Not illness. Only the sweet weight of a day that wanted to become a nap. The wine was mild. The conversation had become a low river. A fly traced the same lazy circle twice and then forgot its purpose. Akinosuke smiled at his friends. He excused himself without ceremony. No one made a fuss. In a village like his, a nap under a good tree was not laziness. It was cooperation with summer. He lay down among the roots of the cedar, where the moss was cool against his cheek. The world smelled of sap and earth and sun-warmed bark. Somewhere nearby, a cup clicked softly against another cup. Somewhere farther, a child called once and was answered. His friends laughed kindly. "Sleep," Akinosuke once said. "We will watch the wine." "Do not let the ants carry him away," said another, and they all smiled at the old joke. Akinosuke closed his eyes. At first, he could still hear them. The clink of a cup. A low joke. Someone stretching with a sigh. Someone saying, and meaning nothing more than comfort. Then those sounds moved farther away, as if a door had been closed in a gentle house. The cedar breathed above him. A slow breath. An old breath. Light shifted on his eyelids, gold to dim gold to a softer dark. And sleep arrived like a door opening inward. Chapter 3. The Road That Was Not There. In the dream, if it was a dream, Akinosuke stood not on moss, but on a road. The road was smooth, packed, clean, as if many careful feet had honored it for a long time. No cart ruts. No scattered stones. Only a pale path leading toward a horizon that seemed both near and endless. The air smelled of distant rain and polished wood. Somewhere far off, there was water, though he could not see it yet. A coolness moved across his face, like the breath of a river corridor. He looked down. His sandals were the same. His hands were the same. The small scar near one knuckle from a childhood fall was still there. And yet the world around those hands had changed its rules. Before him came a procession. Silk the color of deep water. Banners that moved without wind. Faces calm as temple statues, and just as polite. At the front walked a messenger who bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the dust. "Akinosuke-sama," said the messenger, voice careful as folded paper. "Our king has sent for you." Akinosuke wanted to ask questions. "Where am I? How do you know my name?" What king calls for a man who only meant to nap? But in dreams, questions sometimes dissolve before they are spoken. The mouth opens, and the mind offers weather instead of words. So he bowed in return, because kindness recognizes kindness, even in strange countries. "Please lead the way," he said, and was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. The messenger rose. The procession closed around Akinosuke like a soft river accepting a leaf. They began to walk. Chapter 4. The Journey to the Gate. The road unspooled without effort. Akinosuke did not grow tired. In dreams, travel often spends no strength. Hills rose and fell like the backs of sleeping animals. Pines stood in dark assemblies. Once, he saw a heron standing in a shallow mirror of water, so still it seemed ashamed to ripple. No one in the procession spoke loudly. When they spoke at all, it was to offer him water or to ask if the pace suited him. It suited him. Everything about the journey seemed arranged for calm. He thought of his friends under the cedar and felt no panic. Only a distant fondness, as if they were safe in another room of the same large house. After a time that might have been an hour or a season, the road became a bridge. The bridge was lacquer dark and spotless. Beneath it, water moved with a sound like pages turning. Beyond the bridge stood a gate. Not a village gate. A palace gate, tall enough for banners and dignity, soft enough in its lines that it did not threaten. The messenger bowed again. "Welcome, Akinosuke-sama, to the edge of Tokoyo." Chapter 5. The Palace. Beyond the gate, the palace seemed grown rather than built. Roofs curved like dark wings at rest. Eaves cast shade in elegant layers. Corridors ran like rivers of lacquer, reflecting lantern light in long gold threads. The floors made a quiet sound underfoot, not loud enough to startle, only enough to say, "You are here." Servants moved without hurry. No one shouted. Even the birds in the courtyard gardens seemed to understand the local custom of gentleness. Akinosuke was given water scented faintly with plum. He was given a place to sit where the breeze could find him. He was not interrogated. He was received. In Tokoyo, arrival itself was treated as an honor, not an inconvenience. When he was finally brought before the king, the hall did not try to crush him with grandeur. It impressed him with patience instead. The king had kind eyes and a tired crown, as if power had been worn for many years and had learned good manners. Beside him, courtiers waited in silence that felt respectful rather than cold. "Akinosuke of Yamato," said the king. "You have been expected." Akinosuke inclined his head. "I do not know how I came to be expected," he answered softly. The king smiled, as one smiles at a truth too large for a short explanation. "This land is called Tokoyo," he said. "It lies between the maps that waking people trust. It is not far and it is not near. Some reach it by dying. Some reach it by dreaming. Some reach it because a tree older than their village decides to open a door. Akinosuke said nothing. The king continued. It needs a good man more than a loud one. I have watched for such a man. And now you are here. Chapter 6. The Offer. I have a daughter, said the king. She is wise. She is gentle. She is lonely as a winter bell that no one rings. If you will honor this house, she will be your wife. And you will be a prince of this country. Akinosuke felt the moment settle around him. Not as a trap. As a path. He thought of the moss under the cedar. He thought of wine cups and cicadas. He thought of how strange it was that a nap could lead to a throne room. And still, his fear remained small. In the soft logic of dreams, wonder often outweighs alarm. He bowed. Not because he understood every law of this realm. Because the moment was soft and inevitable, the way sleep is inevitable when the body is ready. If your daughter will have me, he said, I will try to be worthy of quiet happiness. The king's eyes shone. That, he replied, is the only worth this court measures. Chapter 7. The Bride. When Akinosuke first saw her, the hall seemed to exhale. Her smile made the lanterns look a little dim, not by force, but by comparison. In some tellings she is given one name. In other tellings another. In this telling, we will call her what Akinosuke felt when he looked at her. Home. She bowed with perfect grace and imperfect shyness, which made the grace more human. Akinosuke bowed too, and nearly forgot the speech he had prepared in the short corridor of his mind. They did not need a long speech. Recognition does not always require vocabulary. That evening, before the wedding rites, they were permitted a walk in a garden where stone basins held the moon in pieces. She asked him about Yamato. He told her about the cedar, the rice fields, the friends who watched wine for one another. She listened as if village details were royal treasure. He asked her about Tokoyo. She told him about rainy seasons that smelled like ink and wood. About festivals where lanterns floated like patient stars. About the duty of kindness in a court that could have chosen pride instead. They paused beneath a pine. Neither rushed the silence. Somewhere, a frog spoke once, then thought better of ambition. Chapter 8. The Wedding. The wedding was not a storm of noise. There were drums, but they lived far away, like weather over another valley. There were sleeves like clouds. There were steps so measured they could have been a form of prayer. Incense rose in thin lines and then forgot to be lines, becoming only fragrance. Akinosuke moved through the ceremony as if carried by a slow current. No one demanded he perform joy loudly. Joy was allowed to be deep and private. When the vows were complete, the court bowed as one body. The king looked younger for a moment, as fathers sometimes do when a child is safely loved. That night, the palace breathed around the new couple. Rain touched the eaves and then moved on. Somewhere in a garden pond, a single fish turned and left a ring on the water that widened and disappeared. Akinosuke lay awake for a while, not from fear, but from the desire to notice everything. The grain of the wooden beam above. The faint resin smell of the lamp. The sound of his wife's breathing, already becoming a familiar country. Then sleep, which had brought him here, returned as an ordinary mercy. Chapter 9. Learning the Court. In the days that followed, Akinosuke learned the manners of Tokoyo. How to greet. How to think. How to sit so that silence did not feel empty. How to refuse a second cup without insult. How to accept a gift without greed. He learned which corridor led to morning tea. Which led to the archives of old maps that did not match any map he knew. Which led to the long veranda where evening insects sang as if paid for their labor. His wife walked with him. She did not hurry his learning. She pointed to small beauties as if they were secrets worth keeping. Look, she would say, at the way mist sits in the pines. Listen, she would say, to the temple bell so far away it sounds like memory. Notice, she would say, how the servants never slam a door, because peace is a habit this house practices. Akinosuke discovered that he could love a life he had not planned. That, too, is a kind of wisdom. Courtiers who had expected a loud outsider found instead a man who asked good questions and remembered answers. In Tokoyo, that was enough to begin belonging. Chapter 10. Spring in the Palace. Spring came to the palace gardens like a soft decision. Plum first, pale and brave. Then peach. Then a green so new it almost glowed at the edges of vision. Akinosuke and his wife walked the paths after rain, when every leaf held a bead of light. They spoke of ordinary happiness. Tea. Rain. The first blossoms. The last blossoms of the previous year, remembered without sadness. Children from the lower courts ran past with kites, and no one scolded them for laughing. Akinosuke thought, this is what a kingdom should sound like. Not only drums and decrees. Also children who are not afraid of their own joy. At night, windows were left open to the mild air. Somewhere, someone practiced a flute badly and sincerely. The notes wandered, found themselves, wandered again. Akinosuke slept easily, which is a political achievement few rulers advertise. Chapter 11. Summer. Summer arrived with heavier air and longer evenings. Cicadas sewed the afternoons shut with sound, then loosened them again at dusk. Heat gathered under the eaves and was negotiated with fans and patience. Akinosuke learned the summer duties of a prince who did not need to pretend invincibility. He checked stores with the stewards. He visited a village at the palace fringe where the well had gone shy, and he listened until a practical solution appeared without shame for anyone. He came home with dust on his hem and was not embarrassed. His wife poured water for him and asked what he had seen. He described a child carrying a sibling almost as large as herself. He described an old woman who bowed as if the bow itself were a blessing she enjoyed giving. They sat on the veranda and let time pass without chasing it. In summer, time likes to be left alone. Chapter 12. Autumn. Autumn turned the maples. One tree became a lantern. Then another. Then the whole hillside seemed to remember fire without fear. Leaves fell with the soft authority of things that have finished their work. Akinosuke and his wife walked through color as if through a gentle parade. They spoke less of plans and more of gratitude. Gratitude for meals. For roofs. For the strange mercy that had brought a napping man into a real marriage. Festival lanterns appeared along the outer walls. At night they looked like a river of patient stars that had agreed to stay low for human company. Akinosuke stood with his wife in that light and felt, not triumph, but placement. As if he had been set carefully into the right shelf of the world. Chapter 13. Winter. Winter narrowed the palace to charcoal warmth, pale mornings, and the clean smell of cold wood. Snow stitched white edges onto every roofline. Footsteps became more deliberate. Conversations moved closer to braziers. In winter they spoke less and understood more. Akinosuke learned that his wife disliked wasted cruelty and loved well-made silence. She learned that he became restless if he went too many days without walking under open sky, even cold sky. So they walked. Wrapped. Breath visible. Hands finding each other without discussion. Years can be counted by calendars. They can also be counted by seasons survived together without becoming strangers. Akinosuke and his wife did not become strangers. Winter after winter, they remained on the same side of the quiet. Chapter 14. Children. In time, children came. Not all at once. Life rarely arranges its gifts in a single hour. First, a child whose laughter was like a small bell in the corridor. Then another who preferred garden stones and the patience of ants. Then another who asked questions as if the universe had customer service. The house learned new sounds. Sandals abandoned in doorways. A toy drum used at incorrect hours. Naps taken in squares of afternoon light. Negotiations about one more story before bed. Akinosuke loved them with a whole heart. The kind of love that does not need to announce itself. He lifted them when they were tired. He listened when their worries were small and enormous at the same time. He taught them to greet servants with the same respect they offered nobles, because Tokoyo's best law lived in that habit. His wife watched him with quiet approval, as if she had always known he could be this kind of man. If this was a dream, it was a dream that knew how to be a life. It knew breakfasts. It knew scraped knees. It knew the particular peace of a household asleep under one roof while rain wrote soft sentences on the world outside. Chapter 15. The long middle of happiness. There were years when nothing historic happened. Those may have been the best years. Akinosuke would handle a small court matter, then forget it by supper. His wife would mend a sleeve by the window. The children would invent a game whose rules changed every few minutes and somehow still worked. In the evening, lanterns were lit one by one. The palace did not try to impress the night. It simply joined it. Akinosuke sometimes thought of Yamato, of friends under a cedar tree, of wine cups and jokes about ants. The thought was not painful. It was distant, as childhood rooms become distant. Not gone, only soft at the edges. He would hold the thought gently, then set it down, the way one sets down a cup that is still half full. If you are still awake, you do not need to track every year. You can let them pass through like weather. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. Again, again, again. Love in the long middle is not fireworks. It is returning to the same veranda and finding the same person willing to sit. Chapter 16. The King's Request. One year, when Akinosuke's children were no longer only small, the king called him close. The king's hair had more silver in it now. His kindness had not thinned. There is an island in our realm, he said. It needs a governor who will be fair, who will listen more than he speaks, who will not confuse noise with leadership. The previous governor was not wicked, only tired in a way that made him careless. Will you go? Akinosuke looked to his wife. She did not answer for him. She only met his eyes, calm as deep water, and he understood that either choice could be lived with dignity if it was made honestly. He thought of his children. He thought of the palace gardens. He thought of the island as a place that might need the same patience he had learned under a cedar tree in another life. He bowed to the king. I will go, he said. And I will try to be the kind of man the island can rest beside. The king placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. That is all any land can hope for, he said. Chapter 17. Crossing to the island. They traveled by boat across water so clear that stones on the bottom looked like thoughts you could reach. The sky repeated itself on the surface until up and down became a polite debate. Akinosuke's wife sat with their youngest against her side. The older children pointed at fish and argued about names. Akinosuke felt the familiar mixture of duty and tenderness that means a life is full. When the island appeared, it rose from the sea like a sleeping animal. Pines along the ridges. Stone where waves had practiced patience for centuries. Villages with smoke curling upward in thin threads. Boats resting on sand as if dreaming of the next morning. No great army waited. Only people with practical eyes, measuring the new governor the way farmers measure weather. Akinosuke bowed first. In Tokoyo, that still mattered. Chapter 18. Learning the island. He did not govern from a closed room. He walked the paths. He learned names. He learned which wells ran sweet and which roofs needed repair before typhoon season. He learned which grandmother knew more about tides than any chart. He learned which young men needed work more than lectures. When two farmers argued over a boundary stone, he did not humiliate either man. He asked them to stand in the field at dawn and look at the land together until pride got tired. Then he asked each to state what he feared losing, not only what he claimed to own. Fear, spoken plainly, is often smaller than fear performed. The stone was moved one hand width, and both men pretended they had one enough. When storms came, Akinosuke helped where hands were needed and stepped back when local knowledge was wiser than his own. He found that people forgive a foreign accent in a leader if the leader's listening is fluent. Years stacked like folded robes in a chest. Chapter 19. Island Seasons. Spring on the island smelled of salt and new leaves at once. Summer brought festivals with lanterns on the water, each light a small promise that night could be gentle. Autumn storms tested every rope and every roof beam. Winter winds came straight off the sea and made the house creak like an old ship remembering voyages. Through all of it, Akinosuke's wife remained his quiet north. When trouble came, they faced it together. When joy came, they did not squeeze it too hard. They let it sit with them like warm tea. Their children grew taller than the garden fence, then taller than his shoulder, then tall enough to carry their own silences. One child loved boatcraft. One loved medicine plants. One loved stories and would fall asleep mid-sentence, which Akinosuke considered an excellent literary critique. At night, after the house settled, Akinosuke sometimes stood outside and listened to the pines. They sounded a little like the cedar of Yamato. Not the same. Related, the way cousins are related. Chapter 20. The long middle on the island. This is the part of life that stories sometimes skip. The long middle. Where love is not a beginning and not an ending, only a practice. Akinosuke woke early and listened to the island wake with him. Gulls. Shutters. Someone raking sand near the boats. A kettle beginning its quiet work. He worked. He rested. He aged in the honest way, a little at a time. There were days of perfect weather that no historian would record. There were evenings when his wife fell asleep first, and he watched the lantern burn low, grateful for a peace so ordinary it could be mistaken for nothing. If you are listening still, you do not need to hold every year. Let them go by. Let the boat ropes thicken with salt and use. Let the children's voices deepen. Let Akinosuke's hair take on the same silver the old king once wore. Time can be a thief. On the island, for a long while, time was also a gardener. Chapter 21. A soft decline. Time, even in enchanted countries, keeps its old habits. One season, illness moved through the household like a draft under a door. Not dramatic at first. A tiredness. A pale morning. A cup left unfinished. A walk shortened without complaint. Akinosuke's wife grew light as paper in his arms, though her eyes kept their old intelligence. He held her hand. He spoke every gentle thing he knew. He told her about the garden. About the children. About the first day he had seen her smile make the lanterns look dim. He told her she had taught him that a life can be large without being loud. He listened to her breathing as if it were a story he could keep from ending. But stories end. Even the kind ones. When she died, the island seemed to inhale and forget how to exhale. Akinosuke grieved without spectacle. Grief does not always shout. Sometimes it simply rearranges the furniture of a life and sits in the most important chair. The king, old now, sent word and wept from afar, then came himself when the seas allowed. The children, no longer children, stood close. Neighbors brought food and then left quietly, understanding that presence can be a gift and noise a burden. Akinosuke understood a truth both bitter and calm. To love for many years is to agree, someday, to say goodbye in a quiet room. Chapter 22. After the funeral rites, after the incense thinned, after the house learned her absence, Akinosuke continued. Not because he was finished mourning. Because islands still need governors, and children still need fathers, and mourning still arrives whether or not the heart is ready. He walked the shore at dusk. He let the sea say the same thing over and over, which is what seas are for. He kept one of her sleeves folded in a chest, not as a shrine that demanded endless tears, but as a proof that happiness had been real. Some nights he dreamed of her and woke less alone. Some nights he did not dream, and that was also a kind of rest. He governed more gently than before, if such a thing was possible. People said the island's disputes grew rarer, as if quarrel itself felt embarrassed in a land where grief had been handled with dignity. Chapter 23. The summons back. Messengers came again. Not with celebration. With a strange, careful sorrow. Akinosuke-sama, they said. It is time to go back. Back where? He asked. They did not answer clearly. In dreams, answers often arrive as doors instead of sentences. He looked at his grown children. He looked at the island pines. He looked at the room where absence still kept her shape. He felt fear at last, not of death, but of losing a life that had become true in every direction. Then he followed the messengers, because some journeys do not ask permission twice. They led him from the island. Across water that reflected two skies. Through a passage that smelled of roots and rain-soaked wood. The palace of Tokoyo fell behind him like a song heard from farther and farther away. Lantern by lantern, the known world dimmed. Chapter 24. Between. There is a part of returning that no map shows. A corridor of almost. A pressure change in the soul. Akinosuke walked through air that felt like the inside of a tree. He heard, faintly, the sound of friends laughing from a great distance. He heard, faintly, children who might have been his, or might have been memory. He did not run. Running would have broken the delicate agreement between worlds. He simply walked, as he had always done when important things required him. Chapter 25. The cedar again. Akinosuke opened his eyes. Moss beneath his shoulder. Cedar above. The afternoon still gold, as if the sun had politely waited. His friends were there, half smiling, exactly where he had left them. You slept only a little while, one said. A short nap. The wine is still cool. Akinosuke sat up slowly. In his chest, decades. In the village light, an hour, maybe less. His hands looked young again. His heart did not. For a moment he could not speak. Language had to travel back from an island that no longer had a road. He looked at the roots of the cedar. Between them, so small he might have missed it, was a colony of ants. Busy, orderly, alive. A tiny procession. A tiny realm. A kingdom small enough to fit inside a shadow. Tunnels like corridors. Chambers like rooms. A discipline of purpose that resembled court life, if court life were humble and tireless. Akinosuke said nothing for a long time. Some say he saw, in that ant nest, the palace where he had been a prince. Some say he saw an island in miniature and a life arranged with impossible neatness. Some say he only felt the truth without needing proof. That a whole life can happen in the space between two breaths, if the mind is willing, and the tree is old enough to keep secrets. He poured a little wine onto the roots. Not as payment. As thanks. The liquid darkened the moss, then disappeared into a thirst older than his name. Then he laughed, softly, the way a person laughs when they have been given a gift they cannot explain. His friends asked what was funny. Akinosuke shook his head. Only a dream, he said. And, because he was kind, he did not force them to believe more than that. He accepted a cup. The wine tasted the same. The world looked the same. And yet he would never again see a cedar root without wondering what countries might be sleeping in the dark soil. Chapter 26. Sitting with friends. They sat together until the light shifted toward evening. Conversation returned to small things. A tool that needed mending. A rumor about rain next week. A joke retold with the loyalty of old humor. Akinosuke participated and also listened from a farther shore inside himself. He felt no urge to make his dream a sermon. Some gifts are kept better when they are not displayed. When they finally rose to leave, he placed his palm once on the cedar bark. Thank you, he did not say aloud. The tree, being a tree, understood anyway. Chapter 27. Walking home. On the path home, the rice fields held the late light. A dog ignored him with affection. Smoke rose from the village in the same patient threads as always. Akinosuke thought of his wife in Tokoyo, and the thought hurt in the clean way that proves love was not imaginary. He thought of his children, and hoped that in whatever logic dreams obey, they were still whole. He thought of the king's tired crown, and wished him winter tea. Then he reached his own door, and the familiar interior received him without questions. He washed his face. He ate a simple meal. He lay down that night in his ordinary bed and wondered whether sleep would take him back. It did not that night. Some doors open once and spend the rest of their existence teaching you how to live with the room you already have. Chapter 28. Closing for sleep. So ends the dream of Akinosuke. A nap beneath a cedar. A road. A palace called Tokoyo. A marriage. Children. An island. Years like folded robes. A goodbye in a quiet room. And a return to friends who thought he had only closed his eyes. If you are still awake, you can picture the moss. Cool. Green. Patient. You can picture the ant nests between the roots, busy with the importance no human court can outrank. You can picture lanterns dimming one by one in a country that may exist only when eyes are closed. If you are already drifting, let the cedar be tall above you. Let your breath be slow. Let your hands unhook from the day. There is nothing you must solve tonight. No boundary stone to judge at dawn. No kingdom you must govern. No procession waiting outside your door. Only rest, and the long kind dark that holds every story until morning. You may let Akinosuke return to his friends. You may let the wine touch the roots and disappear. You may let the dream, if it wants you, find you in its own time. Sleep well. The tree will keep watch. The ants will keep their tiny roads. And morning, when it comes, can come without hurry. Good night. Good night. Good night. Chapter 29. Evening Inventory. In the evenings of those middle years, Akinosuke would sometimes make a private inventory of ordinary mercies. A roof that did not leak. A child asleep with one arm thrown wide, as if embracing the future without fear. A kitchen that still smelled faintly of supper. A wife humming without realizing she was humming. These were not the treasures historians carve into stone. They were better. They were renewable each day if one paid attention. He did not write them down. He simply noticed them, the way one notices a familiar mountain and is reassured that the world has not rearranged itself overnight. If your own evening has such mercies, you may notice one now. You do not need many. One is enough to loosen the day. Chapter 30. The Island at Night. At night the island changed its vocabulary. Day language was work, boats, markets, arguments about rope. Night language was tide, wind in pines, a distant dog, the soft complaint of wood cooling after heat. Akinosuke liked to walk a short loop before sleep when weather allowed. Not as exercise. As listening. He would pass the shrine with its salt-stiff ribbons. He would pass the place where nets hung like dark lace. He would stop where the path overlooked a small bay and let the water repeat itself until his thoughts agreed to be simpler. Sometimes his wife joined him. They did not always speak. Shared silence is one of the advanced dialects of marriage. When they returned, the house received them with low light and the particular safety of a door that closes softly. Chapter 31. Festival of Lanterns. One summer festival, lanterns were set upon the water. Each light was a small, brave geometry against the dark. Children pointed. Elders remembered other years with other faces beside them. Someone played music that was not perfect and, therefore, beloved. Akinosuke stood with his family and felt the rare peace of being both responsible for a place and welcomed by it. He thought of the cedar in Yamato, and for once the two worlds did not compete. They layered. Shade and salt. Roots and tide. A nap and a nation of quiet duties. The lanterns drifted, and the night accepted them without paperwork. Chapter 32. A day with no plot. Listen carefully to a day with no plot. Morning tea. A minor repair to a shutter hinge. A conversation about whether rain will arrive before evening or after pride admits it was wrong about the clouds. Midday rice. An hour of accounts that nearly put even the ink to sleep. Late light on the floorboards in long rectangles. Supper. Washing of bowls. A story for a child who falls asleep before the ending, which saves the storyteller from having to invent one. This is most of life. This is most of Tokoyo. This is most of what Akinosuke was given in his long dream, and it was enough to make waking feel briefly poor by comparison, then rich again when he understood the gift. Chapter 33. Grief is weather. Grief, for Akinosuke, became weather rather than a single storm. Some mornings clear. Some afternoons suddenly low and gray. Some nights with wind that found every gap in the house of the self. He did not try to outlaw the weather. He dressed for it. He worked inside it. He let people bring soup. He let people leave him alone. He spoke her name when speaking helped, and kept silence when silence was the truer honor. On the shore, waves continued their old curriculum: arrive, spend yourself, return, arrive again. He found this less cruel than people who demanded he be finished. Chapter 34. The ant realm looked at longer. Look again with him at the ants. Not as a joke. As a kingdom. See the orderly traffic on a route highway. See the pause where two meet and exchange news too small for human ears. See a burden carried by many, because many is how heavy things move in humble empires. Is it foolish to imagine corridors there? Chambers? A court of purpose without crowns? Perhaps. But Akinosuke had lived too long in a dream to mock small worlds. He knew that scale is a trick eyes play, and that meaning does not always require grandeur. He blessed the nest with wine and with attention, which is another kind of offering. Chapter 35. Longer good night. If sleep is close now, you may stop following plot entirely. You may rest on images only. Moss. Cool, green, patient. Cedar. Tall, dark kind. Lanterns. One, then another, then dim. A road without stones. A bridge over quiet water. A palace that does not shout. A veranda with insects sowing dusk. An island of pines. A shore at evening. A cup of wine on roots. Friends nearby, unworried. Your own breath, slower than it was when this story began. You are not required to reach the end with open eyes. The end will wait. Akinosuke will return to his village as many times as you need him to. The tree will keep watch as many nights as you return. Let the next sound you hear be nothing important. Let the next thought be allowed to dissolve. Good night. The fields are dark in a gentle way. The paths can find themselves without you. The dream, if it wants you, knows the road. Good night.